Today is part 2 of my interview with MJ, talking about disclosures. Part 1, I hope, was as riveting to you as it was to me. One of the highlights was understanding that forgiveness ultimately can be a choice and then eventually become a reality. But there's a giant chasm in between those two realities. And today we're going to talk more about how disclosures affect the betrayed spouse and provide some answers today. Last time we talked about one of the ways that either a disclosure or multiple disclosures affects the betrayed spouse. And I think we could put the name grief, intense, overwhelming grief. But there's other ways that these disclosures affect the betrayed spouse. How else does that happen? What else happens to the mind, the heart, and based upon your belief system, even the soul of a betrayed spouse? How are those affected by this disclosure?
When I think about how disclosures, learning of betrayal impacts someone, my mind conceptualizes it into 3 primary categories. The first one we talked about last time was grief. But this time I'd like to focus on how disclosures impact someone physically, and I want to talk about trauma and how disclosures can cause trauma in someone.
Samantha was so affected physically, we made some crucial mistakes because we just didn't really give credence to the fact that this was part of it. We just thought, man, you're just sick or you're exhausted, but there's more to it, is what you're saying.
I believe and see day after day in my practice, emotional pain manifests physically. Emotional pain manifests physically. People who experience emotional distress can experience physical symptoms. It's quite common when somebody learns of betrayal in the moments around the disclosure, one disclosure,
right,
feeling overwhelmed, feeling sick to their stomach, losing the ability to stand. Some people they go to their knees, they fall to the floor. Learning of betrayal takes someone's breath away. It impacts how they breathe. It impacts their heart rate. And that's just in that initial moment. But in the time following a disclosure, it's quite common for people to say, my appetite has changed. Either I can't eat anything because I'm nauseous all the time,
right,
or I'm just comforting myself, eating too much, trying to find some relief from this pain in my heart. People often experience sleep disruptions. Some people can't sleep.
right.
Some people end up sleeping a lot. Going back to that video that I had done before, where we talked about the amygdala being the part of the brain that's always scanning for danger. And when it detects danger, sends out the signal for adrenaline to course through the body. Hearing of disclosure, hearing of betrayal, something has been happening, some secretive behavior. The amygdala goes, danger!
Right.
And that process happens. They get flooded with adrenaline. So of course their heart rate increases, and of course they have a hard time breathing. And if you have adrenaline coursing through your body, of course it's hard to sleep.
Right.
That makes sense. And adrenaline, remember, it impacts our digestive tract. So the adrenaline could cause reflux, indigestion, all kinds of nausea.
Ulcers.
Right, upset stomach.
Right.
I mean, it can impact the whole digestive tract. And so that is a normal biological human response to these disclosures, an immediate physical impact. And then that impact can last days, weeks, months.
And if there's multiple disclosures,
Yes.
it can last years. And I think
Yes.
it's so easy for the betrayed spouse, because I get email all the time, and it's not uncommon for a betrayed spouse to say, I feel like I have lost a part of myself because I have had 3, 4, 5 disclosures over 6 months, a year. I can't get my feet underneath me. it can't be as simple as eat right and think good thoughts. As an expert, what do you tell the betrayed who has had multiple disclosures? How do you help them get a semblance of them back?
The first step there is education, which is part of why we're doing this, right? We need people to understand. We want them to understand what is happening in their body, what's happening to them biologically, what's happening to them emotionally, so they can start getting their feet back on the ground and gaining some stability.
Right.
So if we learn of betrayal one time, it is D-Day, Devastation Day. It takes people to the ground. It has this huge physical impact. It's an explosion of grief and the grief symptoms. If we repeat that, and it happens again, and it happens again, every single disclosure, somebody experiences that intense physical response to the coursing adrenaline that's going through their body.
As a repair suggestion, obviously it's educating themselves that this is normal.
And what this is and what you're feeling is biological.
Because so many people, betrayed spouses, feel shamed, whether it be people from the faith community or people who have never been through infidelity. They just say, well, you probably need to get a couple of meds and get some sleep and move on. And that's borderline atrocious for the level of trauma that they're dealing with, right?
Well, and when you said that, I was like, and that's kind of gaslighting.
Yeah.
That you should be over this hugely traumatic event that has caused enormous grief, is causing you all these physical symptoms that you can't control. You can't control it starting. You can manage its impact.
Say that again. That's great.
So you can't control the physical impact of this disclosure and learning of the betrayal. It's going to happen to your body how it happens. What we can do, so the next thing I would tell the betrayed is, here's what's happening. Next, how do we manage this so that your body, your nervous system starts feeling better and is soothed?
Yeah.
Let's create safety in your body.
And how do you create safety in your body?
I go sensory. I call it going back to basics. So somebody who's in this active distress, who's heard disclosures, who has learned of the secretive behavior, they're hit with the storm of grief, their body is being impacted, their nervous system is fritzing out because their amygdala is just like, danger, 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 danger. We have to soothe them from a sensory perspective. And so I think of, how do we soothe them? Olfactory, how do we soothe them? Auditory, how do we soothe them? Tactile. And so we'll go through each of those. Listen only to music or TV that will help your nervous system regulate. Many people after disclosure, they can't watch the news for a period of time because hearing more bad news, their nervous system can't handle it.
Right.
So we soothe the nervous system through listening to things that feel good. Food, drink, not that I'm encouraging people to pig out on junk food, but when you're in that much distress, soothe yourself by what you're eating, the taste part, with things that are soothing and feel good to you. Yeah. Sight, that also has to do with what are you looking at. So if people are soothed by certain paintings or certain colors, yes, watch that. I want to go back to, it's kind of a combination of olfactory and tactile. Sometimes for the ladies, using some lotion that smells good, not only does it soothe their body, but there's a soothing of the nervous system through what they smell.
Right.
I encourage somebody who's just experienced a disclosure to swaddle themselves, to wrap them, right? We swaddle babies when they're in distress. Put on comfy clothes, that's a tactile soothing, and get a blanket or a towel and wrap yourself up, because the act of being squeezed sends information to our nervous system that we are safe. It's cocooning ourselves. So it's kind of tricking our brain into, hey, we're safe, we're in this little cocoon.
And they have trauma blankets I have seen as well.
There's some weighted blankets that
Weighted
can
blankets.
be really helpful.
That's great.
Yeah. And even, limiting who they interact with and who they talk with, because at a time when we're in crisis and distress, the last thing that someone needs is to be shamed by someone else or to be told what to do when that's survival mode.
Or how to feel. You shouldn't feel
Or how
this
to
way.
right.
You should be calm. You should just
You
relax.
should forgive and move on.
You've heard the information. You should listen to it, process it, and you should move on. We should be fine. It's Friday. We talked on Monday. It's just absurd.
Right. This takes time and active healing. The next part of the impact of disclosure is talking about the trauma symptoms, how learning of betrayal is traumatic. And so I think of, what is trauma? It's when a person experiences something that is so overwhelming to them. It's so disruptive to their sense of self, to their safety in the world, that the human then experiences this list of trauma symptoms, which is what I wanted to share with you today, Samuel, is what does trauma look like? So that the people who watch this can identify, oh, when this thing happens, it's a trauma symptom. And so if I can treat my trauma, this thing that's happening to me will reduce and go away.
It's excellent. So many people think, if I'm experiencing trauma, right, like I can't get out of bed. I mean, we take it to the worst. Like we're going to get checked in somewhere. We have all kinds of disorders. But, I mean, we're dealing with trauma. This is a traumatic experience. Science proves it. Research proves it over decades. What are some other signs of trauma, predominantly in a betrayed spouse?
So there are several manifestations of how trauma looks. One of the things people might notice that indicates trauma are avoidance behaviors. So when I'm assessing one of my, say a partner comes in, a betrayed partner comes in and says, I'm having a hard time, I learned of my spouse's infidelity, I will do a trauma assessment. And I will assess for how frequently does this person avoid people, places, or situations that remind them of the betrayal. Wow. So an avoidance is a trauma symptom. I often hear my betrayed partners say, I can't go to that restaurant because my person took their affair partner or went to that restaurant and betrayal happened. I can't drive down this street because that reminds me of the betrayal. So the goal is for that betrayed person to live fully, to be able to go to any dang restaurant they want to, and to drive down any street. So when I hear that, I hear avoidance, and I note that as the trauma is impacting them right here. It's limiting their functioning. They're avoiding things. Okay, we're going to work to resolve that trauma. Another trauma symptom is hypervigilance, which is, what that means is an excessive seeking of safety. Being vigilant, being hyper aware is another way to say that. Somebody who has just had disclosure or multiple disclosures, they don't feel safe in the world. Something you and I had talked about, when somebody experiences a disclosure, they lose their ability, they lose their trust in others. They also often lose trust in themselves. How did I not know?
Right.
Or if I suspected it, how come I didn't do something sooner? So there's a loss of, I don't trust you, and now I don't trust me. Now the world is dangerous. There's no safe place.
I don't feel safe at all.
I'm not safe in my body because I'm having all these physical symptoms,
right.
All the emotional grief. I'm traumatized. I don't trust myself. I don't trust you. There's no safe place. And so the person very often becomes hypervigilant, which is this looking for safety. Am I safe there? Am I safe there? Going into the grocery store And it's now suddenly a dangerous place.
Right.
Where yesterday I could go buy, lettuce and a zucchini in the produce aisle. Today, I'm fearful to even walk in the door. Did betrayal happen with that person? Does that person know? Is somebody going to talk to me? Now they are hypervigilant and looking around. What accompanies the hypervigilance sometimes is what we call a startle reflex. The nervous system is now fritzed out. It's almost short-circuiting. And so somebody who's experiencing trauma will say, I'm jumpy now.
Yeah.
My person came in the room like they always do, and my body went. That's called the startle reflex. And it correlates with the adrenaline coursing through their body, with this, I'm not safe in the world. And so when somebody comes into their space, their body involuntarily, by the way, involuntarily will startle.
Really?
Yes, I've had couples where the unfaithful spouse said to the betrayed spouse, why do you keep jumping? Like, stop it. I'm not scary. And the betrayed partner's like, I can't help it. I'm jumping. I don't want to.
Because it's an important moment, because the unfaithful can really do damage when we take the approach, and I know none of you unfaithful are like this, but we can take the approach of he or she is just freaking out, like they're just a mess, and we can marginalize this behavior as our betrayed spouse shaming us, torturing us, harassing us, trying to make us get the lesson. And it's vital that we understand that this is not the case most of the time. Sure, there's that, I'd call it 20%, where a spouse kind of jabs and shames and does all that. I mean, let's face it, we all do it, we make mistakes. But in what you're discussing, it's apparent to me even more the mistakes I made with Samantha, because I would take the approach of, oh God, here we go again, rather than, ooh, like, what can I do?
Something's happening with her.
What can I do to make her feel safe?
Yeah.
And we get paralyzed as an unfaithful, male or female, we don't know. And I mean, what do we do? What can we do to make this moment or these moments safe for the betrayed who are having these reactions?
In answering that, I want to really acknowledge the unfaithful spouse's experience here, because today we're talking about how disclosure impacts the betrayed spouse. Let's just take a moment to name disclosure impacts the unfaithful spouse too. And I don't want to minimize in any way the betrayed spouse's experience. I want to acknowledge the unfaithful spouse has grief, loss. They have their own list of losses.
Right.
Some of the things will be the same as the betrayed. Some things will be different, but there's a list of losses. So the unfaithful is grieving as well, which means that person is going to have denial and anger and bargaining and depression and moments of acceptance as well. There will be physical symptoms for the unfaithful as well. This is devastating. Watching our person crumble from the impact of the betrayal, devastating. And so the unfaithful, remember, their amygdala will go, oh my gosh, danger, danger. They get hit with all of the physical symptoms. So while the betrayed might be going down, might be throwing up, can't eat, can't sleep, can't think, loses joy, can't function in the world, the unfaithful partner may look similar to that, may have some of those very same symptoms happening over there. It gets a little confusing because I hear my couples say, sometimes I'll hear the unfaithful say, I don't feel like I'm allowed or I get to have this experience because look at the pain I've caused my partner. And the betrayed goes, yeah, you don't get to have anything because I'm hurt and you did this. Truthfully, what's happening, these two humans are having these biological processes happen for both of them
Right.
Both of them are grieving. Both of them have physical symptoms. Both of them will have trauma symptoms.
And it's just an all-out opportunity for disaster if you don't have, what I say is, if you don't have the right people involved and if you don't have the right process. Because if you're getting help from the right people, someone like yourself or others, then you can have the right process in place, because forgiveness is a process.
Yeah.
Healing is a process.
Yeah.
Restoration is trauma repair, or trauma healing is a process. And we don't like that. We want to rush it.
And with a therapy team, they're working for the clients, trying to get there as fast as we can through the process.
Right.
Right? We don't want people to suffer. We don't want to drag it out, but it does take some time to move through the different steps of healing. And so thinking about, going back to your question of when a betrayed spouse is having all of this trauma, having grief, having physical symptoms, and having trauma symptoms show up as well, what does the unfaithful spouse do? And you went right to the answer I was going to say. Why are we doing this video? Education. They need to know, okay, when my betrayed spouse shows up like this, I need to know what's happening. This is grief, okay? This is trauma, okay? They're sick. We need to get them to a doctor and take care of what's happening. And the knowledge can sometimes slow down the urge to be defensive.
Fix it. Make it go away.
Right. Minimize it,
Right.
justify it, rationalize it, stop doing.
Yep.
So knowledge is key. The key first step to being able to slow it down and recognize when the betrayed has these symptoms, it's not because they have nothing else to do and they just want to be nauseous and screaming and out of their mind.
Right.
No, they're traumatized.
Yeah. As always, when you come in, it's riveting, but it's so helpful to understand the process. As I started even part one off with, you are a rock star to so many people.
Thank you.
And so I want to give you just a couple of minutes to look into the camera, talk to the betrayed spouse, male or female, who feels like they have just been left for dead, just dropped in a desert, no water, no friends, no help, no direction, no compass. I mean, help them with where they're at. Give them your heart.
So the first thing I'd like to say is, I'm so sorry that this has happened. I can imagine the pain you're feeling, the devastation of the disclosure or the multiple disclosures. I want to offer some hope here, because as terrible as it feels, as heartbroken as you probably are, it's not always going to feel this way. Part of the reason that we're here today is to help you wrap your mind around what you're feeling and to have some sense of the next steps of how you can care for yourself. I want to encourage you, the first thing that you can do right now is to think about how to soothe your body, comfort yourself through tactile, auditory, olfactory comfort, visual comfort. And then if you haven't yet, I want to encourage you to reach out. It's important that you have support. A therapist who's trained and skilled in how to help heal betrayal trauma is just so necessary. And I really want to encourage you to look into finding a support group, because we heal in relationship. And when you are isolated and alone in this pain, it can fester and get bigger. And so I want to encourage you to reach out and connect with people who are safe for you, who can help you heal, who won't tell you what to do, but who will be really supportive and kind and empathic as you are healing. I want you to have in mind, as you move through the next days, to comfort yourself physically, to go to the doctor if there's physical symptoms that you need to take care of. But also think of yourself as a grieving person, and to find people who will allow you to grieve and help you move through that process. and to recognize you've experienced trauma and that trauma can be healed. Trauma is not a sentence. And so get yourself to someone who can help you move through and heal the trauma and the pain in your heart.